Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and if you looked at our menu, you would see that we have lots to talk about today. If you actually watch online, you can see all the pieces of paper in front of Debbie Georgatos and see we have lots to talk about
Still
today.
organizing.
And so we've got certainly those issues that we will be talking about over the next couple of hours. We're going to focus in just a minute on whether or not students have the right to pray. This is a story coming out of North Texas, and I thought it would be a good way to kind of start out since we're in that holiday season. And our good friends up there and Americans United for Separation Church and State, Freedom from Religion Foundation, the American Humanist Association, ACLU, have all sorts of problems during this time of year of the holiday parties, which are no longer called Christmas parties. And so we're going to talk about that for a minute. A little bit later, I'm going to get into, and I know Kelly Shackelford has a lot to say about these delayed and essentially now postponed nominations. Very good article we've posted today on religion and the Supreme Court. We'll certainly step in and talk a little bit about the migrant caravan, which we've been talking about this week, and a variety of other issues. Debbie had one on gay activists in Christian churches, so those are just a few. And by now you probably figured out who's around the round table. Let me formally say Debbie Georgatos, host of her radio program, America Can We Talk, and author of the book, Ladies Can We Talk. It's always great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
And Kelly Shackelford, of course. We haven't seen you in a while. I know you had a wedding and a couple of other activities, and so anytime we can get Kelly Shackelford and First Liberty here, it is great. So help us out. Take us to Honey Grove, Texas. I know something about that. When I moved to Texas, I always thought my grandparents were in Missouri. It turns out that my grandfather and grandmother were married in Honey Grove, Texas.
Oh, wow.
And I did not know that. And because we knew he had come from Texas but moved to Missouri, they actually were married there. And my father, when he was checking that, because he loved all the genealogy, actually got their marriage certificate, which they left behind. So Honey Grove is not the bastion of humanist thought, but nevertheless, for anybody in the North Texas area, they know that it's just north of Dallas. And they told the students they couldn't pray. Talk about this.
Well, it just shows you that this is everywhere, that there's fear and hostility and just that this kind of thing happens everywhere. And this is why really kids, families, while we have our pamphlets on what are your rights in the public schools, what are your rights as a teacher, as a student with regard to your faith, what are your rights in the military. Well, it's why we lay all these things out, because people get scared and they do crazy stuff. But this is like a new crazy.
This is a new crazy.
Which is to tell the kids who are wanting to pray during lunch that they had to go behind a curtain.
You just can't make this up.
That they weren't allowed to do. That somebody else might see them. Now good. I want to, congratulate the school district on, quickly when we got involved, making clear that this should not be happening and really taking the right stand. But the fact is, it is happening, and it's happening. I bet everybody who's listening, there's no telling how many places this is happening. And
you know?
And you don't even know it's happening to your kids or to your grandkids. And so that's why it's important to have those kinds of conversations with them, and to make sure that this is not happening. Because what happens is, this reminds me of the scripture where Jesus says, better to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the sea than to make one of these little ones stumble. These are people who aren't ashamed of their faith, and these are innocent children. If you teach them early on to be ashamed of your faith, I think you've done an incredibly damaging thing. And so we have to make sure as parents, as grandparents, that we're speaking to our children or grandchildren so that they know that if this does happen, it's not right. It reminds me of, I don't know if you remember Gabriela Perez.
Oh, sure.
The case we had in Florida a number of years ago with a 5-year-old who was told to stop praying over her meal. And she was told, this is by the school officials, right? It's not good to pray at school is what she was said. And I'll never forget because her parents videotaped her. And so it was on YouTube. I think you can still see it
Yes, I think you can, yeah.
if you look it up.
Maybe I'll find a link here for it in a minute.
But I remember them saying to her, what did they say? And she said, they said I can't pray at school. And they said, well, what did you say? I said, yes, I can play at school. And I thought, here's a 5-year-old who knows that she has a right to pray.
Isn't that good?
And so we need to really, embolden our children and have them at least know to come to us if anybody ever tells you not to pray, or as in this case, to go behind a curtain or to go outside the school. You're not allowed. You're allowed to sit there at the lunch cafeteria, but you can't pray at the lunch cafeteria.
You mentioned your resources. Let me just mention, because we get these phone calls every time, where can I find those? And when you go to firstliberty.org, the drop-down menu says Take Action. So you click Take Action, which then takes you to the resources. And under resources, you have the Religious Liberty Protection Kit. So you have to push 2 buttons to find them. But there's a Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers, also one for the military, one for ministries, one for churches, one for Christian schools. Outstanding resources. But again, sometimes people have trouble finding them. So go to First Liberty, Take Action, resources, then you'll find those kits,
and
which
if you
are
have
so well done.
A specific question on a specific scenario, call. Just call. I mean, we had to file a lawsuit this week in Airmont, New York. On
I
behalf
saw that
of
one too. I want to
Jewish
talk about
synagogues.
that in a minute. Yeah.
It's just incredible what people are having to go through around the country. It's, there's a public school right next door that has I had to get the numbers, but it's like they have, a certain number of square feet, and they have 5 times the number of students as the Jewish school. But the Jewish school wants the ability to have 1/5 per square foot, and they say, no, that's too many kids. So this is the type of thing that's going on to discriminate against the religious schools. And people don't know. They're like, hey, wait, can they do this? They need to call us if they have a question on these kind of things. There's a lot of discrimination. Some of it's obvious, like the situation with Honey Grove, when you tell kids they can't pray, they have to go behind a curtain. But a lot of it, people don't know. They're just not sure. And so they need to know there's a place they can call, and we're happy to walk them through it.
Debbie, I know you have some thoughts.
Many. One point I was going to say was it's interesting to think what was in the mindset of this, whoever it was that told the kids they had to go behind a curtain to pray, because part of what people begin to think because of headlines is that there's maybe some right of other students not to be offended. So maybe if they're protecting all their students, they are protecting kids who might be uncomfortable around prayer, might complain, hey, these kids over here are praying. So this notion of right not to be offended has become a popular concept. And it is maybe, I don't know what was in this administrator or principal's mind, but that is one that somehow they're protecting other students with their, from their, or protecting their right not to be offended. And I know we can talk about it more later, but the First Amendment it has wonderful things in it, but there's nothing in there about the right to not be offended.
Well, and again, we'll come back to one of the other cases we're going to talk about after the break, and that is you have a coach, and they said the coach can't even pray at the 50-yard line after the game is over because somebody might see him, and you see the same kind of idea. Well, we don't want kids praying because, after all, one of the other kids might see them praying. So you can see how these ideas just sort of reproduce themselves all over the country. So I do want to come back and talk about that. We've talked about some of these cases with Keisha Russell's been on the program with us, and the one up in New York. Again, I go to New York every year, so I understand, and you're from New York, so we understand some of this, but still, it's just amazing what's happening. So we got a lot of other First Liberty cases, and we got 2 lawyers around here, so I really want to hear their comments, and we will do so right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Does plagiarism matter to Christians? That is a question Dr. Warren Throckmorton asked in a recent column. I had him and Mary DeMuth on the Point of View radio talk show to discuss some of the problems that have surfaced in Christian publishing. In the secular world, plagiarism is a big deal. In his article, he documents cases where people have lost their jobs or received severe sanctions both in the newsroom and in the academy. And if a professor catches a student engaged in plagiarism, we know that student faces severe consequences as well. Warren Throckmorton isn't convinced that the Christian world takes the issue seriously given the response to a number of high-profile cases of Christian authors lifting material from other books and calling it their own. Sometimes there's a legal settlement, but often the issue is greeted with a yawn with no further action taken. Mary DeMuth believes that one of the reasons for this problem is the Christian celebrity culture. Big-name authors bring in lots of revenue to Christian publishers. At the same time, there is pressure for authors to produce books quickly. Interns or associates they hire to write much of the material may not be careful about what they lift from other sources, and sometimes the authors themselves are borrowing concepts from other authors without appropriate citation. Warren Throckmorton also believes that if we started demanding that authors write their own material, ghostwriters and researchers would be out of work, and fewer books would be published by these authors each year. We might expect that the Christian world would hold to a higher standard in publishing than the secular world, but the lack of response from Christians on social media about some of these cases of plagiarism suggests that we aren't holding authors to that standard. The solution, of course, is for those of us in the Christian public to hold them accountable. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again as we are talking about a couple of these religious liberty cases. And Kelly, set the scene for us, because when we hear about Honeygrove, we go, okay, that's just maybe one administrator kind of losing their perspective. But years ago, you had a case out of Plano, which is not far from where we're broadcasting right now. And that wasn't done by one administrator. These were policies set down that, again, when you read the policies, you just had to shake your head and say, they got to be kidding. You couldn't have red and green napkins. It had to be a winter party. It could not be called a Christmas party or even a holiday party. You couldn't have Santa Claus. You could have snow people.
Yes.
Tell
that
us
was
the
my
story.
favorite. Well, well, it started with a little boy who brought his present. You know, they had a winter party at school. It's so stupid. You can call it a Christmas party. There's no reason to call it a winter party. People aren't celebrating winter in their homes around the country. I mean, that's just so.
I know.
I mean, it's political correctness that, you know, whether you think of Donald Trump, one of the things he's done, he's sort of smashed a lot of the political correctness.
Yeah.
This is the kind of political correctness that needs to be smashed. Everybody should call it Christmas, Hanukkah. They should call things what they are. But they were giving gifts to one another at the winter party. You know how we all do that? We give gifts for winter. So this little boy brought his gifts, and his gifts were, he had seen this poem about the legend of the candy cane. And a lot of people have seen this, and it's like that the candy cane, it's a J for Jesus. It's the stripes and the purity of the white and all this. And so he just thought that was the coolest thing ever. And so he got a little copy of this poem, and he put a candy cane pin, because they couldn't have candy, at school. That was a violation. So he got the poem with the candy cane pen and put it in a peppermint bag, and he had 22 for his classmates. And he gets to the door, and he's told, and he's looking, and everybody's got their gifts in there, and his teacher says, "No, I'm sorry, you can't bring your gifts into the classroom." Well, why not? Because you have religious things in your gift. And therefore, he was banned.
Mm-hmm.
And
A
that's,
candy cane.
Yeah, this is where it started. And so
Yeah.
we were came in and said, "Look, I'm sure we can correct this." And we said, this is a violation. You can't say you can express something unless you say something religious. That's religious discrimination. It violates free speech, violates free exercise. And they're like, no, we have all these policies. And we should look at the policies. And I'm reading this to the press. Okay,
Yeah.
we're at a press conference, and I'm saying, okay, I want you to I just want to read to you what this says. You can't use symbols that say anything about religion for Christmas. You can use things like sleds, snowflakes, and snow people. And I stopped, and I looked at the press, and you could tell they were going, "Oh my gosh!" And I said, "What kind of sick individual thinks of the sex of a snowman?" And they were just bursting in laughter by that point. And
I know, it's just so hilarious.
anyway, but we ended up.
Yeah.
What was great is this school district was so hostile that the judge got so angry that he ordered that a copy of his emergency injunction, his restraining order, be posted at the front door of every school
Yep.
the next day before their winter parties, so that it was clear that they couldn't be discriminated against. And what I loved is that there was a headline in the Dallas Morning News the next morning, because this little boy had come to school with his gifts that he had set aside when he's told he couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is a year later. It took a year to get to this next Christmas party, winter party. And so for a year, he had been holding on to these, hoping that maybe he could finally give these to his friends. And it said he walked in the door, and he realized he was going to be able to go through. The headline on the next page, when you sort of turn from the front page to the next page where the article picked up, was "His eyes lit up."
That's great.
And he gave his gifts that he held for a year. And to me, again, this goes back to that scripture when Jesus says, "Better to have a millstone tied around your neck than thrown into the sea," because this is the innocence and purity of faith. This is somebody who wants to share with others their faith, and the idea that would be squelched or really tampered, maybe for life, by the government, by school officials, whether it's intentional or not, that's something we should never allow. And so it's a good story how that came out, as far as what happened and how the law came out. And it was posted at the front of every elementary school in the school district.
I love that what this little boy took away from that whole story has to be, too, that, yeah, you do stand up and fight. Not that when you're told you can't do that, you don't just go home and say, well, I don't want to be disruptive. In the correct way, you challenge, especially as any kind of violations of your rights, but certainly when your religious expression is being repressed. He learned that lesson watching what his parents and First Liberty did to stand up for him, and he thought he learned that's the right answer in America. You stand up. I love that.
But again, the sad reality is in a lot of school districts, they're treating religious expression almost like pornography,
Right.
aren't they? I mean, it really, and that sends the wrong signal, because we wonder later on why kids leave the Christian faith. Well, it's obviously not very important because it's not important in the schools, or it's even seen as corrupting or
banned.
dangerous. Yeah, so there's some really important issues there. I wanted to pick up one other one. Debbie, you're from New York. I go to New York every single year, speaking either at Camp of the Woods or Word of Life. And a couple of these cases, Kelly, out of New York. One, a court of appeals actually protects religious liberty. That has to do with a religious ritual. And then you talked about another one, which in terms of just sort of the zoning issues. And so whether it's religious rituals or whether it's zoning, you have defended, and this is, I think, surprising to some people that think you only defend Christians. You have defended a fair number of rabbis and synagogues, and some of the cases have been here in Dallas, but some of them, of course, been up there in the state of New York.
Yeah, we have. We have cases literally across the country with Jewish synagogues that we're representing. One outside of L.A. Well, I say one. There's actually two different appeals going on with our cases out there. Dallas. We have a synagogue we're representing who currently is being told that their synagogue needs to be destroyed because They don't have enough parking spaces. Okay, they're Orthodox Jews. They
don't
walk.
They don't
Okay,
drive.
they walk. And then now we've got a number of cases in New York. Airmont, New York, especially, which is where this is, has a really sordid history. This town was literally created for the purpose of discriminating against Orthodox Jews. The federal government had to come against them. This is all the way back to, I think, 2005. Anyway.
What is this town?
Airmont.
Oh, wow. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
And so it's got some incredible history to it. And now we've got two different legal actions we're having to take. I mean, one of which they're essentially telling you can't have a religious meeting in your home if you use over, it's like, there's some different computations, but essentially if you're using like 20% of your home for a religious meeting, you get fined. So, and that includes the common areas. Now, the only reason they're doing this is to try to stop these Orthodox Jewish groups from meeting. But this would literally, apply to Bible studies or anything else. This new one we just had to file this week is they've had this property for, this 21 acres of property for many years, but now that they're wanting to increase the size of their school. And they don't want them to increase the size of their school. And so they're using the most it's just pure discrimination. The arguments they have just are completely baseless. And so there's a history to this. It goes way back with the federal government having to get involved a number of times. And now we're seeing it again. And so we're representing Orthodox Jewish synagogues across the country who are just trying to be synagogues, trying to have their religious schools. And obviously, we're all in this together, whatever people's faith is. Either you have religious freedom or you don't.
It is so appalling to think about the reason America was founded, because our forebears came here for the idea of saying we should have religious freedom. And to think that we have progressed or regressed as a society where we have to battle out in the year 2018 whether a Jewish school can expand its size or needs to have adequate parking when everybody walks, to the synagogue. These are just, they are the cumulative effect. The attitudes we're hearing, they are the cumulative effect of kind of disdain for religion, the determination to push it to the side. It's kind of a personal thing, but keep it out of the public square. I think there is I use the word cumulative, but there is an impact of years of Supreme Court decisions that denigrate church, denigrate religion in the public schools, that just make it, it's the mindset is religion is this tiny little thing over here. It's not really what we're all about. And I love that you're challenging all of the things you just described. I love that we're taking that on in America, because there should be a resurgence of just celebration of a country founded on religious freedom.
Let's take a break. When we come back, our second article is one that is called Religion and the New Supreme Court, John Yoo and James Phillips. That also takes us into a case that Kelly has before the Supreme Court, a couple others he's hoping the Supreme Court will take. And that will be, I think, a fascinating discussion about religion as well. So let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
We're going to spend some time talking about religion and the Supreme Court. This article that we've posted here, which appeared in National Review, it's about 8 pages. I would really encourage you to print it out, because we're going to kind of work our way through some of this and tie it into some of the cases that Kelly Shackelford and First Liberty have either already in front of the Supreme Court, that will be the Bladensburg case, or some others that may make their way to that. And I think we are seeing a new Supreme Court. I mean, you put names like Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh on there, and you think back over some of these close votes, Hobby Lobby, Little Sisters of the Poor, what turned out to not be so close, the Masterpiece cake, only because it was 7-2 because they didn't like the animus, but it could have been another one of those 5-4. Kelly, we now have a court that really, I think, does believe in religious liberty, and that is good news for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I was talking to our staff about a month ago, and we have a vision statement. Like most nonprofit organizations, there's a mission statement, what you do, but there's also usually a vision statement. And I found that usually the vision statements are sort of pie in the sky, never will happen. It's like, everybody's in peace and harmony and the lion and the lamb are laying together. And you're like, well, that's probably not going to happen in my life. And so you don't look at it as something realistic. And it just hit me when Kavanaugh got through that this is the first time since the 1920s that we've had 5 justices who actually want to follow what the Constitution says. And I thought, our vision statement at First Liberty is returning our country to, with regard to religious liberty, to the vision of our founding fathers. And I realized that's about to begin to happen. Mm-hmm. We have 5 justices who are going to start to return us to the Constitution, which what that means is they're going to start, instead of, and I don't know how many people understand this, but judges, these more liberal judges, make things up. They come up with tests. They come up with new approaches that are nowhere based in the Constitution. And that's why we hear these different things. The wall of separation between church and state. It's not in the Constitution, okay? And so it's a pretty bad term, and it's misused all the time. And so we're now going to start to see a lot of the clutter that's sort of it's almost like the scaffolding built around the Constitution is about to be knocked down little by little. And it's going to allow religious freedom to flourish, and there'll be less, restrictions and obstacles or barriers or whatever. And so that's what this article really gets to. It's saying now that we have these justices, we have 5 justices for the first time in most of our lives. I don't know, there might be some listening that were here, in the early 1920s, but probably not most people. And so they're saying, well, what do we need to do now that we have justices looking at the Constitution? What do they need to do to get, what is the garbage they need to get rid of to get back to just what the Constitution was meaning?
I do really want to encourage all our listeners here in Point of View, this article that Kerby's mentioning, Religion and the New Supreme Court. It is so well written. And I was reading it this morning thinking, if I weren't a lawyer, would I follow it? And you definitely would. It's just it's very substantive. The First Amendment, just all it says is beauty and simplicity. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's all it says. And the case law developed over decades and centuries that you were alluding to, Kelly, really has managed to harm both of those tests. The free exercise idea has been very tailored and limited unnecessarily, as has the Establishment Clause. And I don't know which you'd say we talk more about here, but there have been so many instances in which any kind of government involvement or even permission given, the case we've talked about many times in the show where the Coach Kennedy kneeled, that was viewed as, because he's a public school employee and people might see him kneeling, that constitutes an establishment of religion by the state. When you say it in that way, it's absurd.
It is.
But the tests have gotten us to where the court doesn't look back at that language of the First Amendment, but instead they go through the various tests that have developed, and the two, I don't know if we're going to get into talking to it right now, I don't know which direction you're trying to go, but in this article, they're talking about two basic decisions from the Supreme Court that have set the standards for how the court, or they're among the most basic standards the court uses to assess challenges relating to free exercise or establishment. And so, I'd love if you want. Why don't you tell Kelly about what the Lemon case is? I've marked the Daily Times.
Aptly named. It's aptly named the Lemon Test. It's like a bad automobile you purchased that you want to give back.
So good, so good.
And but was it what it did? It was built on. There's a great dissent written by former Chief Justice Rehnquist in a case called Wallace v. Jaffrey, where he says, look, lemon's bad, but the main reason it's bad is it's built on bad history. Because what they essentially did in Lemon is they went back to this idea of the wall of separation of church and state.
There we go.
And then they built a test around it. Well, number one, that's not in the Constitution. And what they meant, even when anybody used that phrase, was not what people try to use it for. It meant you're trying to keep the government out of the church. It didn't mean that, for instance, notice it's church and state. It's not religion and state. It's talking about institutional separation. And so they built this test, though, because they started with this bad premise that basically what government is supposed to do is to be neutral with regard to religion, which means the government is not allowed to say religion is good or to do anything that would be pro-religion. Well, the founders would look at them and go, what is wrong with you? That's not what we said. But that's where they built this test. And so it becomes hostile to anytime the government is around anywhere with religion, you want to strike it down. So Lemon, and it led to even worse, which is O'Connor's endorsement test. The endorsement test says that if the government does anything that some walker by can say, oh my gosh, I see that there's a manger scene on the city park. That must mean that the government is endorsing
the
religion,
Christian faith.
And therefore I'm psychologically damaged, and therefore this is a violation of the Establishment Clause. That's not what the founders were trying to do. The Establishment Clause was, we don't want there to establish a national church and to tell us you go there, you get punished. The whole point of the Establishment Clause was to make sure we had the fullest free exercise. But what's happening now is they've been using for years the Establishment Clause to try to shut down religious expression, to be anti-free exercise. And this is the beauty, and we don't have a whole lot of time before the break, but this is why the case that we have at First Liberty before the Supreme Court, the Bladensburg Veterans Memorial case, this is a cross that's been up for almost 100 years, that was put up by the American Legion and mothers who lost their sons in World War I. And this radical court, following some of these radical ideas, said, yep, unconstitutional, establishment of religion, got to tear it down. Well, that would mean you'd go into Arlington National Cemetery and you'd have to start tearing down all the large freestanding crosses there. It's a hostility to the cross and to religion that the founders would never conceived of. But that's the great news. John Yoo, and if you read this article, they say the Lemon Test needs to be gotten rid of. What is the easiest way to get rid of a bad test? With a case with facts that almost everybody agrees with. Mm-hmm. This, if you poll this thing, we did this last time we were at the Supreme Court on this kind of an issue. It was 93% of the country said, don't you dare tear down that Veterans Memorial. I don't know what it's going to be. We'll probably do a poll on this one or have somebody do it. I bet you it's close to 90%. Let's say it's 85%. That means it's a great vehicle for the court to go, okay, we know, this is not a violation of the Establishment Clause. So it's a clean time for them to say, Lemon Test, gone. Let's go back.
Openly reversed.
That's right. We are going to now go to what the new... in fact, as we're working on the brief right now, that's one of the things that's taking the most time is we're having to tell them what the new approach should be. And so the possibilities, whether this happens in our case or whether it happens over a number of cases, I think we're going to see great change. And so this article is very interesting. And again, we can talk about free exercise as well, but this is just on the Establishment Clause being used as a sort of weapon against religious displays, where you almost use it like a religious cleansing, where no, crosses or stars of David can be in public anywhere because everybody's offended. Well, that's not what the founders ever meant to do. And I think we're going to move back more to what the founders meant and what the Constitution says.
And since it's Christmas season, we might as well remind them of the Pawtucket, Rhode Island case, in which basically they said this is permissible even though there's a Christmas creche. Also, we have Frosty the Snowman and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and a variety of other things, so people will not be offended by a creche in the midst of all that. As a Christian, I'm offended by all of that.
Yeah.
You can only have Jesus if Santa is standing next to him.
Yeah, so there you go.
Or the Santa Claus leaning over the manger. Have you seen those?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
We're going to come back and talk also about the Smith test, because that's another one that is related to one of the cases that Kelly might have before the Supreme Court. We'll be back right after this.
You've heard of helicopter parents, the kind that hover over their children with too much fussing regarding the details of kids' lives. They're inclined to smother, to swoop in to rescue their kids, often irritating coaches and teachers. A new trend in parenting has been identified, the rise of lawnmower parents. One college professor calls them an evolved breed of helicopter parents. These parents not only worry excessively over the challenges their children face, they remove or preempt obstacles before they even reach their kids, like a lawnmower smoothing the path. A story from a website for teachers went viral at the beginning of this school year. A We Are Teachers community member, a teacher who wanted to remain anonymous, described a dad who arrived at school in the middle of the day in a business suit to drop off a water bottle for his teenage daughter. When she texted him several times that she just had to have it, he suggested using the drinking fountain. Not good enough. So Dad brought the water bottle to school. This teacher was polite but incredulous. She wrote, "Lawnmower parents go to whatever lengths necessary to prevent their child from having to face adversity, struggle, or failure. Instead of preparing children for challenges, they mow obstacles down so kids won't experience them in the first place." Another classic lawnmower mom called to ask for an extension for her child's writing project, stating, "I just usually handle this kind of thing for him." She's depriving her child of a routine growing experience. The We Are Teachers writer states, in raising children who have experienced minimal struggle, we are not creating a happier generation of kids. Parents tempted toward lawnmower parenting should realize it will cripple their children. Sure, your kid may be anxious about doing something out of his or her comfort zone. Encourage your child to move forward and trust the Lord. Then, trust your child. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is Weekend Edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I suspect we'll get a number of calls next hour because we're going to be talking about the delayed and postponed nominations. But just wanted to work through for just a few more minutes this very good article, 8 pages long, and it's actually the 5th in a series. So if you really wanted to, as Debbie pointed out, read this without necessarily having a legal background, it's very well written. And John, you and James Phillips are the authors of Religion and the New Supreme Court. We talked a little bit about the so-called Lemon test, Lemon versus Kurtzman. There's another one, and it's a case that also is related to something, Kelly, you're working on. Employment Division versus Smith. Now, that one relates to the Free Exercise Clause. The other one relates to the Establishment Clause. Tell us more.
Well, what I would say to people is if they paid attention at all, there's almost no free exercise cases, or there haven't been for the last, 5-6 decades.
Right.
And really a part of the reason for this is the Smith decision, which is a really horrible decision in my opinion. And it was written by Justice Scalia.
I know. The one of the few times I disagreed with him. Yeah.
And essentially what he said is that when the founders put free exercise of religion in the Constitution, they really only meant to protect when the government was aiming at your religion. So if the government passed a law that not only destroyed your religious freedom, but that destroyed something else, then that wasn't a violation of free exercise. It was only generalized, generally applicable statutes, for instance, what they said, don't violate free exercise. So if they said your church can't do so-and-so, then that's a violation. But if, let's say, they said, oh, we got these alcohol to minors statutes, and so we're going to go into the Catholic Church and begin arresting priests. If the priest were to say, hey, wait, this is a free exercise of religion, they'd say, no, I'm sorry, this law applies to everybody, so you don't have any religious freedom. I mean, it's a horrible concept. It's wrong, and it's led to nobody being, basically, if you look at all the victories we've had on our side, I mean, there's a couple of exceptions, but all the victories we've won have been under free speech, not free exercise, because you couldn't win. And so the Smith decision needs to go. And an example, we have the case with the Oregon bakers, the Kleins,
right,
who were asked to do the gay wedding cake, so they couldn't, respectfully declined, and were not only did the state of Oregon come after them, but they were fined $135,000. Their business is bankrupted. They were ordered not to speak publicly their beliefs on marriage. I mean, just the most horrific case. We're now at the Supreme Court waiting to hear if they're going to take this. What is one of our arguments in the case? Argument number 3 is you need to overrule Smith. So it's exactly what John Yoo is saying here. That needs to be overruled, because if it's overruled, then their free exercise clearly comes into play here. They have a right to the free exercise of religion, and they should not be forced to make a wedding cake that violates their faith and conscience. I think most Americans would agree with that. You don't force people to violate their faith. There's no reason for that. And so we need the free exercise clause back at its full vibrancy, and hopefully one of these days we'll get rid of Smith, and we'll do that.
It is so interesting, disappointing to people who follow the Supreme Court closely, that Justice Scalia, who was just a champion for the Constitution and really willing to make unpopular decisions in order to uphold the Constitution's standards, got off track in the Smith case. It's a funny thing, though, because I wonder if it's a little bit about bad cases making bad law, because the Smith case involved Native Americans who argued that they had to imbibe in hallucinogenic drugs in order to practice their faith, and that violated the state law that said you can't use those hallucinogenic drugs. And so, unfortunately, instead of finding another way to resolve it, it was an easy thing to say, no, if the law says you can't use those drugs, then you don't have an exception. But it really ended up seriously curtailing the jurisprudence developing on free exercise.
And I think it illustrates a point that we need to make every once in a while here on Point of View, and that is you may not like the case, but you definitely want the principle. I remember back when I used to write columns occasionally in the Dallas Morning News, I wrote a case about the Bob Jones case where they removed the tax-exempt status from Bob Jones. Later, I wrote about a case having to do with the Unification Church. And I remember how I got just pilloried about that. But I said, look, sooner or later, the Bob Jones case may come back to affect you. And of course, when we had Obergefell, that was the question that came up there. And so whether it is hallucinogenic drugs for Native Americans, whether it's Sun Myung Moon and the Unification Church, whether it was the past policies that no longer hold to it at Bob Jones about not allowing interracial dating, you may not like the case, but you better like the principle, because sooner or later that principle will come back and hurt you.
But what would be, Kelly, this is interesting, you all are working, and I'd love to hear how you're thinking about this, because if you had, for example, the law that says that they had in the Smith case originally, no hallucinogenic drugs, and the Native American group said, but that's required by our practice, that those two things are contradictory, so you have to have some some test developed by the Supreme Court to say, yes, there can be cases where the law says X and is inconsistent with your faith, but we're still going to permit you to pursue your faith. Some test about whether, and I don't know what it would be. I'm really curious what you're going to propose.
It's there's a test that's been in place for a long time. Goes back 80 years, I think, on how you treat our most fundamental rights under the Constitution, like free speech and free exercise should be the same, which is it's a strict scrutiny test.
Okay, yeah.
Which is there a compelling government? Because these rights aren't none of these rights are absolute, right? Do I have religious freedom? Yes. Does that mean I can sacrifice my children? No.
Free speech is a good example. You can say a lot of things, but not in a crowded theater.
Yeah,
you can't defame people. Yeah.
So how do you do that test? Well, it says, is there a compelling governmental interest for interfering with this fundamental right? I mean, compelling means it's really required. It's not something that they just want to do. If there's a compelling interest, then are they meeting that interest in the least restrictive way they can to your freedom? If those two things are in place, then they're allowed to override that right. So, when those things don't exist, the government, what that essentially does is it puts all the burden on the government. It says you are interfering with an individual citizen's fundamental right to free speech, free exercise, whatever. You've got a heavy burden to meet. Here's your burden to prove compelling governmental interest, least restrictive means. That's where this would go. And so, for instance, take the bakers. And look, the way we've done with the Oregon case, the Klein case, and I would encourage point of view listeners, be in prayer about this, because the court probably maybe February or March will be making a decision about whether they take this case. And I hope they do, because they need to clarify this for the whole country. But our first argument is just a free speech argument. You can't force people to say things that they don't want to say, okay? So if they want, they can just answer this under the First Amendment free speech clause. But then we go on and say, but you really should go on and deal with this free exercise issue. And if they were to apply it there, for instance, how would they apply it? They would say, is there a compelling governmental interest? Now, there might be an argument. They might say, ridding ourselves of discrimination, and we think this discriminates and all this. Is there a least restrictive way to do this? Yes. There's plenty of ways. Do these people not have the ability to get a cake? Does anybody think that that's really a problem? And so the point is, we are a big enough country to live where everybody can have their different beliefs. The LGBT community can have their beliefs, and so can the Kleins. And there's no reason to force ourselves into a small room where somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. Everybody can have their freedoms, can differ in their beliefs, and can live at peace with one another. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Makes sense to me.
Amen.
We have a lot more to cover, and we're going to get back to this whole issue of nominations. That's coming up right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, and we certainly do welcome you to the broadcast. And we have, as we always do in our weekend edition, a roundtable of individuals. First of all, Debbie Georgatos, who is the host of America Can We Talk. You can listen to that on Sunday. And, of course, the author of Ladies Can We Talk. And it's just great to have you back in studio with us again.
Love being here. Appreciate every time you invite me.
Well, I appreciate you sitting in this chair every once in a while, too. So you do a very
really
good job.
fun, yeah.
That is a lot of fun. You know, one of the things we've been talking about, which for many of our listeners, we're just starting the program, but we've been talking about some other things previously. And you have mentioned a book that I thought we might want to highlight real quickly, because it's one that helps us understand what we're up against when we talk about asserting kind of religious values, right?
Absolutely. In the last hour, and we may again touch on these cases, but we've been talking about religious freedom in America and how there has just been, over the last 80 years or more, just pressure to minimize the protections provided by the First Amendment, to distort what the Establishment Clause means, minimize the freedom that under the Free Exercise Clause. And I just want to add an element of thinking about that for our listeners, which is that it's really important to understand what the First Amendment actually intends, and that's what the article that we've been talking about does. John Yoo gets right at the roots of the First Amendment. But the other related point I wanted to mention for our listeners is that there is also a political element to this, a political mindset to this. And I wanted to mention a book. This is actually a book that was written by Mark Melcher, Melcher, and Stephen Soukup, Soukup. It's called Know Thine Enemy, A History of the Left. And it traces over 100 years of history of leftist thinkers, obviously from Europe and then in America, but leftist thinkers who talk about the way to condense power, the way to collect power at a federal level and have a society based on government control instead of a society based on individual liberty, is to destroy the importance and influence of the churches and of the family. It traces the ideological links between communism, socialism, progressivism, what the left calls today in America progressivism. All it has at its core, among other things, the importance of the idea that you have to destroy the institutions in society that help perpetuate and teach the next generation what our rights are, what faith means. And so if you have churches largely stifled, you have public expression of religion in the schools and churches stifled, muffled, limited, and controlled, and the notion of free expression being very limited, the political outcome is you don't have those institutions in society that shape children's views and understanding, that perpetuate not just our values, but our faith and the importance of Christian faith and all faith and what it means and its central place in people's lives. It's been cast to the side. There's a very political mission about minimizing the First Amendment.
I might just mention, if you'd like to join our conversation, since calls are already coming in, 1-800-351-1212. And Kelly Shackelford with us as well, First Liberty, and we have some great resources there. But Kelly, I've been waiting to hear your comments. The first article we've posted here, Senator Jeff Flake's obstructionism over Protect Mueller bill delaying 21 Trump judicial nominations. Now, since that was published, it didn't just delay it. I think it essentially moved it to next year. But talk about this, because you actually know some of these individuals very well that are now just being put in limbo because of an action by one senator who's leaving the United States Senate from Arizona.
It's really disgraceful. I mean, I've never seen a more juvenile, immature person in the United States Senate that I can think of. And I'm not sure what he's trying to accomplish. I mean, number one, if you just look at, he's fighting for this to have this vote on this bill that's unconstitutional.
Yes, it is.
Where the legislature would try to tell the president who he can hire and fire in his executive staff, which you can't do. And so because he's so principled about having a vote on this bill, and by the way, the bill is ridiculous. The idea, I mean, it's clear that the president is not going to fire Mueller. I mean, he could have done that anytime he wanted in the last couple of years. He hadn't done it. But so Flake has decided, well, I'm going to force a vote on this bill. And if you don't get a vote on this bill, which is unnecessary and is also unconstitutional, then I'm just going to hold up all the judicial nominees. Since it's a 51-49 Senate, Republican, Democrat, I'm going to throw a tantrum, act like a 2-year-old, and hurt our government, keep all these really good conservative constitutionalist judges from going on the court. What a disgrace. I mean, I have no idea what he thinks he's doing politically. This is the only issue I can think of that unites every Republican, establishment Republicans, conservative Republicans. Everybody's like, get these judges on the bench. He's just making sure that he's going to be hated by every Republican. It's just sad. It's dumb. It's childish. It's sad. And it's having an impact. I mean, will these people all get on the court? Yes. But it'll be, 2.5 months from now.
Right.
And it's just going to delay all these courts from having judges that actually want to interpret the law according to what the law says, the Constitution says, the statute says, and we're all now as a country going to be deprived of that for months for no reason except his tantrum.
Let me say one thing, because you know some of these individuals. One of those individuals actually has worked for you, and so don't believe what you first of all read in the press. We try to encourage people to have some discernment, but it has been amazing. I guess we shouldn't be surprised when we see all the things that were said about Brett Kavanaugh to be not surprised that there are nasty things being said about, 6 circuit court nominees and 15 district court nominees. But in many cases, we're talking about very qualified individuals that are being pilloried in the press and being held back because of one individual by the name of Jeff Flake.
Yeah, there's really not, he's not against any of these people. One of the people he blocked was somebody he
put forward.
Yes. That's how ridiculous what's going on. These are incredible people. They're people that Point of View listeners would just be so proud. They would be going, this is going to be so great. They're going on the Ninth Circuit. We've got this conservative jurist that's going on the Ninth Circuit. I mean, you can imagine how excited people would be to finally get good judges on the Ninth Circuit. But it's all over the country. It's all the circuits, all the district courts. All that is being held up. And again, he's gone, and January 3rd, we got new senators. We've got plenty to get by this and to get all these people on the court. But this is going to delay all these people on the court, and it's really totally unnecessary, and it's sad.
Juvenile was one of the best words you used about Senator Jeff Flake. I will say, again, recently in some press conference, Senator Flake confirmed, or he would not deny that he may be looking to run for president in 2020. And I'll tell you that this is a little bubble of people he connects with who all despise President Trump as much as he does, and he thinks he's making himself out to be a hero. And I think it's a grotesque misread of the attitude of the American public toward President Trump, that he thinks because it's his world of people who don't like President Trump that somehow he is increasing the odds of him with a successful primary challenge to President Trump. I mean, it's absurd beyond absurd. It's ridiculous, but it is living in that little bubble he lives in. And what's especially egregious is I think we'll have 53 Republican senators now when the new term starts.
Cindy Hyde-Smith,
They'll all get, all these justices. So this is just a 6-8 week delay, or maybe 2 months by the time they get them all done, for no purpose other than to grandstand. So it is a signal that I'm the tough guy. I don't think he couldn't have won in a primary anyway, but he certainly couldn't now.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, those of you in South Carolina want to pay attention, because I think Kelly's got some comments there. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Does plagiarism matter to Christians? That is a question Dr. Warren Throckmorton asked in a recent column.
I had him and Mary DeMuth on the Point of View radio talk show to discuss some of the problems that have surfaced in Christian publishing. In the secular world, plagiarism is a big deal. In his article, he documents cases where people have lost their jobs or received severe sanctions both in the newsroom and in the academy. And if a professor catches a student engaged in plagiarism, we know that student faces severe consequences as well. Warren Throckmorton isn't convinced that the Christian world takes the issue seriously given the response to a number of high-profile cases of Christian authors lifting material from other books and calling it their own. Sometimes there's a legal settlement, but often the issue is greeted with a yawn with no further action taken. Mary DeMuth believes that one of the reasons for this problem is the Christian celebrity culture. Big-name authors bring in lots of revenue to Christian publishers. At the same time, there is pressure for authors to produce books quickly. Interns or associates they hire to write much of the material may not be careful about what they lift from other sources, and sometimes the authors themselves are borrowing concepts from other authors without appropriate citation. Warren Throckmorton also believes that if we started demanding that authors write their own material, ghostwriters and researchers would be out of work, and fewer books would be published by these authors each year. We might expect that the Christian world would hold to a higher standard in publishing than the secular world, but the lack of response from Christians on social media about some of these cases of plagiarism suggests that we aren't holding authors to that standard. The solution, of course, is for those of us in the Christian public to hold them accountable. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, it is Weekend Edition, and we have Debbie Georgatos and Kelly Shackelford around the round table here, and we will take some of your phone calls. Already calls coming in, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention before we ask Kelly the next question, and that is we have posted quite a number of articles today that I think you will find helpful because it is, I'll be the first one to say that, you know, after Thanksgiving, from Thanksgiving to New Year's, things used to quiet down, Debbie, around here, and it hasn't happened under the Trump administration. So we have stuff on delayed nominations, which we're talking about right now, religion and Supreme Court, some things on the migrant caravan where Donald Trump and Ben Carson kind of disagree a little bit, so we'll get into that. Some evangelical voter myths, some things about life expectancy, gay activists, and Christian churches. So if we don't get to all of it, of course, there'll be an opportunity on Monday to cover those as well. So lots to talk about here today. Okay, Kelly, I told our listeners in South Carolina to pay attention. I think they might know what's coming, but explain why we all of a sudden are paying attention to Senator Tim Scott.
Well, we now have the second. This has only happened really 2 times, and it's both been Senator Scott that's caused it. We've had great judicial nominees ready to go in the court that Scott has killed. And I know many, many conservative people in South Carolina, you know, like Tim Scott. But I'm telling you what, if he was my senator, you know, he'd certainly be hearing from me. He already stopped Ryan Bounds from going on the Ninth Circuit, which was ridiculous. I mean, every article written, go look at it online and see what really, you know, this was a good, solid conservative guy who there was no basis for attacking him. And Scott waits, the guy's been waiting for a year and waits until right before the vote and says, well, he didn't have enough information and so he was going to vote against him. And so we've now lost, you know, months, many months of having a solid conservative guy on the Ninth Circuit. You know, I mean, as Rush Limbaugh says, the Ninth Circus, right? So you're about to actually replace one of the most liberal courts in the country with a solid conservative constitutionalist who's going to follow the Constitution, and he blew it. Well, now he's done it. He's doing it again. This time he's doing it with Tom Farr. And, well, why? Well, it's like, because there was a DOJ. Farr was the attorney for Helms, Senator Helms. And way back in, 1990, when he was the general counsel or the attorney for Helms, Helms was in elections and different things. Well, some stuff went out, postcards that were sort of voter suppression like, and the DOJ even said there's a problem with this. Okay, here is Farr's sworn statement. When I first saw the language on the card after it had been mailed and was advised as to whom it had been mailed, I was appalled. In other words, he knew nothing about this. Mm-hmm. I immediately recommended that the Helms Committee cancel their program, which they did. I then spent the next several months working with the Justice Department to resolve the matter with a consent decree. So that is what Tim Scott says. Oh, I can't vote for him. I can't allow him to go through. And so now we're about to lose another great, person on the federal bench because of Tim Scott. This is disgraceful. This is why the Republicans are laughed at. They can't, hold their people together, even on ridiculous charges. And it's because, unfortunately, this is the second time. This is the one thing that unites every Republican, whether they're conservative or an establishment Republican or whatever. They know these judges need to go in the court. These are excellent picks. They've been vetted very well. These are really solid people who are these are the kind of people that sit next to you in your church, okay? These are not the kind of, political appointments we used to get in the past. Well, so-and-so supported the president, and my brother would like to be a judge, okay? That's not what this is. These are people that the Federalist Society and other groups have looked at, their judicial philosophy, Heritage Foundation, all of us included, First Liberty, to look at these people and go, these would make excellent judges. They're not about their politics. They're about following the law, submitting themselves to the law and the Constitution, and these are very bright people. And to lose somebody again, I encourage people who live in South Carolina to call Senator Scott and tell him how disappointed they are in him, because this is twice he's done this, and he's the only senator who's done anything like this.
You know what this does touch on or relate to is there has been such an effort in politics, and again from the American left, to try to plant the seed in American political thought that just lurking below the surface in many people's minds of all is racism, that somehow there's this unspoken racism that's just is below the surface. And so it has truly harmed America. It's harmed our ability to have intelligent political conversation, to go back and forth and discuss ideas, things like voter ID, all sorts of issues, because the argument's always made, well, the reason you want voter ID and pictures is because it's really subtly racist. Doesn't even have to make sense. It's not racist at all. Everyone has to have the same ID. But this Tim Scott story, it does sound like he's been drawn into that a little bit. He's just believing this lie of the American left, this endless effort to plant the seed of racist suspicion, of beneath the surface, simmering disdain for other people who don't look like you. I mean, there really is no other explanation for Tim Scott to take this tack, because it isn't like he's gotten some information which no one else knew and proved something wrong. He's buying into that effort of the left to just convince people that there's this simmering racism everywhere. And this is why Tim Scott, has to be the one to stand up. It is really egregious. I mean, and I agree with what both of you are saying. I think if our listeners in South Carolina were to communicate to the GOP, to Tim Scott, to his Senate office, I am disgusted, appalled, angry, and honestly, maybe this kind of stuff is enough for someone to primary him.
Well, we will find out, won't we? And again, we will see the difference this next year. I will suggest that the incoming Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, will be able to keep her coalition together. And Mitch McConnell has trouble herding cats, and there's a good example of that. Let's take some phone calls along the way. Let's go, first of all, to Tim in Ohio. Tim, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. What would you like to share?
I have a couple of questions. One is I saw recently where apparently the city of Austin has passed an ordinance mandating that churches have to hire homosexual or transgender individuals as their pastors or staff. That doesn't sound like it's constitutional to me. And I had a question about Sharia law as well.
Okay.
The first question, I'm not sure if you're mixing up something. There wasn't a controversy down in the Austin area, but it was actually Austin School District, I think, was refusing to allow their facilities to be used by churches or groups that, quote, discriminated or had discriminatory beliefs. And that would actually keep the church from using the school. Well, as soon as I think Texas Values, for instance, really stepped up in that battle.
And Jonathan Saenz has been on with us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's now been reversed, if I'm not mistaken. But I think that's probably what you're referencing. And that was wrong. As you say, that would be unconstitutional. You would have the government, in this case, discriminating against people based upon their beliefs, their religious beliefs, and that would be a clear violation of the First Amendment.
Well, and Tim, let me just mention, we'll get Jonathan Saenz back on again. That's been fun to have him on. Kelly and I were just at one of his events just the other day.
That's right.
On Sharia law. Of course, I have a little booklet on that, and you've heard me say before that one of the best arguments against Sharia law is the numbers 1, 8, and 14. First Amendment is 1, and obviously Sharia law would demand that you have just one religion, that'd be an establishment of religion. 8 stands for cruel and unusual punishment. Sharia law certainly violates that idea. And then 14, of course, the idea of equal protection. Under Sharia law, a Muslim has more authority and more rights than a non-Muslim. Frankly, a man has more rights than a woman. So that's the first point. But you had another question about Sharia law. So what do you want to put on the table here?
Well, I'm just curious about that in general, because now we've got a couple of Muslim individuals who are part of Congress.
Sure.
And with the senator around that, the First Amendment says, both free exercise, you can't establish religion and you can't prohibit free exercise. And so I'm kind of my question about the Sharia was, if in communities where the Muslim community is more strongly against assimilation, that if they want to since Sharia is inseparable from Islam and in its fundamental structure, are we violating their free exercise?
Right. Well, since we're coming to a break, let me just cover it real quickly. That is, first of all, there's been some very good documentation on how some of these lower courts have used Sharia law. The Center for Security Policy, matter of fact, that's mentioned in my Sharia law booklet. But again, they've done some great work on that. And that's kind of a concern that maybe not in this country, but look in France, where you just have some of these no-go zones. But we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that, what that might mean. But we have one of those mandatory breaks. We'll be back right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let me just mention, as we are going around the round table, of course, we have Debbie Georgatos and Kelly Shackelford. At the Christmas season, this is a time when all of a sudden you get all sorts of controversy. And so I just thought I'd mention, again, we have a link so that you can find your way to firstliberty.org. If you click on the Take Action, then there are resources, and there are these protection kits, and those in particular I want to focus your attention on, religious liberty protection kits for students and teachers. Because, Kelly, this time of year, our friends at Americans United for Separation of Church and State, Freedom from Religion Foundation, the ACLU, American Humanist Association, tell us all the time that you can't have Christmas carols, kids can't pray, you can't have a Christmas party, you can only have a winter party. So that's one of the resources we wanted to point you to today.
Yeah, and that's all false. My favorite is they have Christmas programs that celebrate Christmas all over the world, and then they show how every faith celebrates Christmas, but they can't talk about Christians celebrating Christmas. You're like, no, that would be discrimination. I mean, it's just incredible what people do and how misinformed. And so but we see a lot of things corrected by parents, people who listen to the show, that stop that silliness from happening in their school.
So again, with some resources there, but okay, let's come back to this for just a minute. Debbie Georgatos, first of all, let me just mention that here is our Sharia law booklet. So if somebody wanted to read a little bit about Sharia law, but Tim asked a very good question. You are starting to get in certain places, let's take Dearborn, Michigan as a good example, where you have a high percentage of Muslims who are saying, we really don't need to assimilate. We really just need to have our own area. And they're taking their cues from some of these no-go zones that you have in France, and even in the United Kingdom right now, you are allowed in some jurisdictions to use Sharia law, not for the criminal code, but at least for the civil code. And they're saying, we just want to have our own legal system. What about that?
First, I love that we're bringing this up because and Tim from Ohio, our caller, had a great question. But to be real clear about what Sharia is not just, I heard someone defend it say, well, Christians and Jews have the 10 Commandments, Islam has Sharia. That is not it is not a list of teachings like the 10 Commandments or even the Sermon on the Mount. Sharia is intended to be an all-encompassing, complete replacement for every single aspect of civil and criminal law in a society. In the countries where it is embraced on a complete basis, Sharia is the law that replaces all secular law on every single subject imaginable. And it is like in America, if you think a law is unfair, unconstitutional, as First Liberty will do, they'll challenge laws, they'll challenge actions. There is no way in Sharia, when it is strictly enforced, for any citizen to ever challenge it. You have the mullahs or whoever the highest religious authorities are in your country, they decide, and that's the end of it. And so Sharia is a repressive, dark, carrying punishments we would never even talk about on radio. They're so hideous, but clearly beyond our Eighth Amendment standard of cruel and unusual. But Tim from Ohio's question related to what if there were people who in America said, well, we have our community, Dearborn or somewhere else, and we're all Muslim. Or in Minnesota, they have similar issues going on, and we actually we don't want to assimilate, and that means not only do we not want to have our children become part of your society, we don't want you, the community around us, the Christians or Jews or whoever, the atheists around us, we don't want you part of our community either. So we're keeping you out of our schools, we're keeping you out of our neighborhoods, we're keeping you out of our public restaurants or public facilities. This is what goes on in the no-go zones in Europe. And so Tim from Ohio's question was, what about their free exercise? If they say Sharia is part of my faith, I'm Muslim and I believe in Sharia and I'm not supposed to assimilate and I don't want to welcome into our community, our schools, our neighborhoods, our homes, we don't want to welcome non-Muslims. Isn't America repressing the freedom of religion of Muslims if we say, but you can't do that here? And that gets back to what we were talking about. The free exercise clause is a vitally important half of the First Amendment. But what we were talking about was the free exercise clause never means that you can absolutely do anything you want and say, I'm justified because of my religion. earlier in the show, Kelly Shackelford was mentioning what the standard should be, or what we'd like to push it toward, with respect to courts reviewing free exercise claims. And he basically said we're using a strict scrutiny standard that's used with other challenges to our rights in court. And so the two basic standards a court could look at to decide this question. One is there a compelling government interest in this case would be in saying you can't restrict people of non-Muslim faith.
You can't discriminate.
You can't discriminate. And then two is at least restrictive means. There is no least restrictive means to do this. If you're going to permit an Islamic community to carve out an area and say no one else can come here and our laws apply and Sharia applies here, so your local, state, and government laws don't apply because Sharia does, and that is the goal of the Islamists in the world, that is utterly in conflict with the core idea of our country and with the idea of the First Amendment. And there has to be, if that were to be the case, I realize we're talking about a hypothetical, but it's not that hypothetical because it is happening in, as you mentioned, Kerby, in the UK, it's happening in France, it's happening in Germany, carving out of zones and saying, and actually Angela Merkel had to retract her public statement. She said, we don't have any no-go zones in Germany. And then she had to say, actually, we do. So they are essentially seceding or surrendering control of their government to areas, and that cannot be protected by our free exercise clause.
Yeah, I mean, it goes against everything that America is about. I mean, the whole point is you come to America to be American and not to try to, have your own separate society that refuses to, interact and to have your own set of laws and everything else. So it's, again, as you said, Kerby, it violates the First Amendment, it violates the Eighth Amendment, it violates the 14th Amendment. I mean, it wants to treat people differently based upon, some people get more freedoms and protections than others based upon who they are. I mean, nothing could be more anti-American than that. The cruel and unusual punishment is obvious. And then just the whole point, the religious freedom. I mean, it's a destruction of religious freedom. It's like there's one religion and only one religion in that system, and everything else. I mean, you can't find any Muslim countries in the world that allow religious freedom.
Yeah,
you just can't.
In Saudi Arabia, which is the most, that's our closest ally outside of Israel in the Middle East. That's our ally, whether you already think about the whole situation with the guy who was murdered. But even in Saudi Arabia, there are no other religions permitted except Islam. You can't have Christian churches. You can't have Christian Bible studies. It is treated as apostasy, even when you weren't ever Muslim to start with. Yeah. It's absurd over there.
Let's take another phone call. We'll go to Dave in Missouri. Dave, thank you for calling today.
Well, thanks for taking my call. I am being denied the use of my local post office because the biblical content of my mail is being called hate mail, and I cannot find a lawyer to take my case.
Well, it sounds like maybe if you can write out some of that material and send it to First Liberty, maybe you can find out.
Well, I'd like to have their address.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty simple, isn't it? It's on the website here, so... If nothing else, what about when people run into some difficulty, whether it's in the schools, whether they're having problems with the post office or their business? They're saying, I'd like to have a Christmas party, and say, no, you can't do that, or I want to wear a pin or something like that. How does somebody go about even seeing whether or not they have a case in the courts?
Well, there's it's easy. You can go to First Liberty, you spell it out first. Liberty.org, and there's a way to do that online to put all your information in, et cetera. Sometimes people just want to call and ask questions, to know what the law is in a situation. Again, they can call. The First Liberty number is 972-941-4444. And because, even you might have a pamphlet that says, here's what your rights are, but you might have facts that are slightly different, and you just want to make sure and kind of have somebody walk you through it. But mainly you just need to, call. I mean, the first step when something happens is to find out what your rights really are. Find out, because a lot of times what's being done is we live in a country that has religious freedom. So almost assuredly, I always think of the funny case where the guy thought he wanted to write scripture verses on the toilet paper in the restroom of his business. Well, that inconveniences others, so he doesn't have that right, okay? But outside of that, otherwise, you do have a right to live out your faith in this country. It's protected by state laws. It's protected by federal laws. It's protected by the Constitution. So most of what people want to do are protected. They just need to have somebody walk them through that. And so don't be intimidated out of living out your faith in any way because somebody tells you something. My favorite with school districts is, well, we have a policy against that. We're always, oh, great. I'd love to see a copy of that. And it's amazing how many times that policy never appears.
Never was in paper, never in writing at all.
No, it wasn't a policy. It was the policy of that person who just wanted to say, I don't want you to do this. So the first step is always find out what your rights are, make sure you know, and then go the next steps that need to be done. But we've got to stand up for our faith, or that faith will be taken away. We've got to be good stewards of what we've been given.
And again, the Religious Liberty Protection Kits for all sorts of different aspects of your life on the website, firstliberty.org. We'll be right back.
The midterms brought an interesting lesson in racial politics. Columnist and black conservative activist Star Parker says voting data reveals what she describes as a fateful anomaly in racial voting in the governor's race between Democrat Andrew Gillum and Republican Ron DeSantis, now Florida's governor-elect. Mr. Gillum is the former mayor of Tallahassee and was running to become the first black governor of Florida. Star Parker points out that the black enthusiasm we might have expected for him didn't exactly pan out. Racial politics, she writes, played a high-profile and nasty role in the Gillum-DeSantis contest. Gillum lobbed strong and unfair allegations of racism against DeSantis. Yet black young adults posted a significant increase in votes for Republicans over Democrats in this election. It's actually African American women who made the difference for Ron DeSantis. William Maddox writes in the Wall Street Journal that 100,000 of the 650,000 black women who voted in Florida unexpectedly chose him over the black Democratic candidate Andrew Gillum. This is 18% of black women supporting the governor-elect. Only 9% of this group voted for Republican Senator-elect Rick Scott. What was the issue that prompted these women's support for a Republican? School choice. Mr. Maddox is director of the Marshall Center for Educational Options at the James Madison Institute. He points out that 4 years ago, Florida's Governor Scott narrowly won re-election thanks to a spike in support from school choice moms. Ron DeSantis campaigned on parental choice in education. He voiced his staunch support for retaining and even expanding Florida's tax credit-funded scholarship program that enables more than 100,000 low-income students to attend private school. Andrew Gillum opposes school choice. The lesson is, let's boldly support the conservative policies blacks care about. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
One of the other articles we've posted here today, and this was one that Debbie really highlighted, and it's further down the list. I think it's the 7th article. Gay activists are coming after Christian churches next, and it's already happening. And this one goes to what's happening in Canada, but then we also have one in terms of some of the drag queens and what they're doing in the public libraries and schools and things of that nature. And so let me just come to you for just a minute, Debbie, because this is something that you've been following. And if you want to understand what America looks like if we don't have people like Kelly Shackelford and you and others standing up, we give, in a sense, a preview because we look at what is happening in Canada, and it is pretty amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing. It's a great article. The link on pointofview.net is gay activists are coming after Christian churches next, and it's already happening. And the quick summary of a bunch of cases that this article reviews, what it really is getting at is the idea that the LGBTQ activists believe that their support for their demand for being treated as equal and being treated as having a right to engage in their lifestyle should trump the right of Christian churches to teach biblical teachings about marriage. And just the one example in the beginning, they're talking about how a woman who attended a Baptist church in Canada, which there are many other churches in her community which may have been more liberal in their views with respect to marriage, but she chose to attend this Baptist church, which was following scriptural teachings related to marriage. This woman, this activist, had a long-term relationship with a same-sex partner, and so when she told the church about that, they removed her from membership. And what's just so striking about it is how strident the attitude is. It is not saying, they didn't tell her she can't come to church, didn't tell her she can't attend services, but membership in this Baptist church, as in many churches around the world, Christian churches, requires you agree to live by the standards that church teaches and which are derived from the Bible. And so this is an activism not just against this one church, but then a community activists are starting to pressure the government in Canada to say, well, if these churches are getting tax breaks, and tax breaks are essentially you're taking away money that they should be paying, but they get tax breaks, they shouldn't get them if they engage in and they label the advocacy for following biblical standards related to marriage, they relabel as hate and intolerance. And so they're saying you should not be giving, these LGBTQ activists are saying to the government there, you shouldn't be giving breaks to these churches because they engage in intolerance and hate. And so that's what they're labeling the teaching with respect to marriage. There was no allegation this woman was harassed, maligned. She simply chose to join, was even a youth group teacher or something like that, not a pastor, but a youth group leader. And then when she finally said, well, I'm in this long-term same-sex relationship, they said, that doesn't really work with us. So that was, but the kind of link of events that happens where you're first equating the right to pursue a same-sex relationship, and then you have the courts acknowledging that same-sex relationships can be the premise of marriage in some countries, or maybe many countries, I don't know. But then the next step is to say, and therefore what is taught in churches with respect to marriage, if it does not embrace same-sex relationships, that is what is to be targeted by the government, by the public, and impermissible to have that teaching continue. They're really saying you need to shut down pretty much straight out gospel teaching by the churches because LGBTQ activists recharacterize it as hateful. So that was the first story. I don't know. I thought Kelly wanted to chime in. I don't know, but
there's no, and look, there's not it's not a big move or step at all from the Klein case, the cake bakers, the photographers, the artists, et cetera, with weddings who are being told by the government, you will do a gay wedding cake, or you will do the calligraphy for a gay wedding, or you will do, there's not much difference between that and then them coming and punishing the church, because if you can't do that, and you can't do it, and they're not going to allow, and this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, which is our country is plenty big for people to have different beliefs and to be able to exist, and so this is this is the ultimate intolerance. I can't stand the idea of anybody disagreeing with me, and I'm going to use the power of the government to destroy them if they don't agree with me. And the sad thing is how short-sighted that is, because once you give the government that power, it won't just be used on your opponents. It will come back and be used on you. Mm-hmm. And it's just the beginning of the end.
Well, and one of the quotes that I use in a January issue of Outlook, in case you are going to be receiving that, is from Chai Feldblum, who basically said that if there's a conflict between LGBT rights and religious liberty, LGBT wins every time. Now, what she was doing is trying to treat them as equals, but what you're getting into, Debbie, is more of a philosophy that's now saying, no, it's not even close to equal because everything that you religious people do is hate speech. So you don't even deserve an equal opportunity to make your case, right?
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is. It's both a legal issue and it's also just the cultural or the political conversation. The cultural conversation is begun to be considered the norm. Well, of course, everyone understands we have LGBTQ activists and they believe in this. And so those who even want to say, well, I don't want to teach that to my children, or I don't really want that taught in my kids' schools, they are the ones not really permitted in our political conversation, which ties into the story I sent in just this morning. So I'm glad I don't know if we can quick get to it, but there's a development of this just astonishing thing in public libraries around America, and they call them DQSH Story Hour. DQSH, which stands for Drag Queen Story Hour. They do it right here in Dallas. And we happen to be in Dallas, but these are all over the country. It's public libraries where they have a story hour. I used to take our kids when they were little to story hour, and somebody read some sweet story, some kid's story. Well, now they have public libraries condoning this. Men coming in dressed as women, clothes, makeup, the whole bit. So they are drag queens, their term, not mine. And they want to be, and they are actually in the situation of reading to children and reading stories dressed up as drag queen. I mean, males dressed as women. So this is occurring around the country. There have been people talking about it here in Dallas, but there was a case involving Lafayette Public Library in Louisiana and Lafayette City Parish Council in Louisiana. That was happening, DQHS. And they had a meeting of the city council, I guess they call it the parish council there. But they wanted to they had a motion to denounce that public school libraries have drag queens teaching story hours, because some parents said, geez, at least I thought it was a safe place to take my kid to the public library. Now I have to encounter this. And so there was pushback against those parents at the hearing and at the place where this motion was being considered, again, labeling people who didn't want their children read to by drag queens in the public library, labeling them as hateful. But the astonishing thing that came out was one of the people who is and one of the drag queen story readers in the public library, the statement and the parish at the hearing was, this is going to be the grooming of the next generation. We are trying to groom the next generation. They're acknowledging it's not just expanding understanding, expanding kids' knowledge that not everyone looks like your mommy and daddy. There are people like us out there. This is intentional implanting in the children's minds. This is normal. This is what you might be when you're grown up. We are grooming you to think of yourselves this way. They are acknowledging that. And it's one of those hard things, speaking up in America, because if you just stop going to the public library as your only protest, the public library continues. But to have the parish equivalent of the city council trying to have a motion denouncing it, and the LGBTQ activists were strident and belligerent, name-calling, calling people who didn't want this haters and intolerant. And so whoever speaks up, I don't know. People who are strong enough, I guess, still speak up.
Well, if nothing else, you might say, I got to read this for myself, and we have it on our website, pointofview.net. Come back, we're going to talk about religion and the Supreme Court. All that coming up right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend some time talking about religion and the Supreme Court. We've sort of been talking about it already, but we really want to get into it in a little bit more detail. The second article that we've posted here is a very good article, one I would recommend. It is about 8 pages if you want to print it out, by John Yoo and James Phillips. It's entitled Religion and the New Supreme Court. I want to do it for a couple of reasons. First of all, it is just helpful to look back on some of these religious liberty cases, because we have Kelly Shackelford here and, of course, Debbie Georgatos, 2 lawyers, and I just love to sit back and listen to their wisdom. But, Kelly, let's come to you for just a minute, because in both of these cases that they're talking about, in both of these sort of tests and establishment and free exercise cases, you have cases either before the Supreme Court or cases you hope will go before the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I think the article is really a good article, because the best way I can describe to people is that this is the first time in pretty much everybody's lifetime. I mean, there's a few that were alive maybe, but basically the 1920s, that we have a majority of justices who actually want to follow the Constitution, of conservative justices. We haven't had that. So what we've had in all those other years is judges and justices sort of doing what they think is right and making up tests and things. And a lot of times these tests are not really tied to the words of the Constitution. And so they create a lot of rulings that begin to go the opposite way that the Constitution and the founders really meant for it to be. And so, for instance, in the area of religion, there's some bad decisions. And they go back to what tests they're using. So like there's the endorsement test, which says the government can never look like it is endorsing religion to some passerby in the community. Well, the founders would be just like, what? They would say that we didn't write anything like that in the Constitution. It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And if now, and you go back to the Lemon test, which is aptly named, is a horrible test, but it's the test that's been guiding, and it essentially tries to treat religion like, well, the government has to be neutral between religion and non-religion, which means that the government can't be pro-religion in general. The founders, I think, would be shocked at that concept. I mean, really, if you literally applied that approach, you would strike down the free exercise clause. Mm-hmm. Because the free exercise clause protects religion when it doesn't protect non-religion. And so it's really a bunch of warped stuff that's been created that is now sort of, I look at it like these appendages and I don't know, bad sort of weed growth on the Constitution. Well, I think it's about to be ripped out slowly but surely, because we're going to have justices who are going to say not what does the test say, but what does the Constitution say? And so the first of these is the area of the Establishment Clause and getting rid of the Lemon test, and that's what the article talks about. The interesting thing about this is we have a case, and the Supreme Court has accepted our case. It will be argued this spring, and it is going to be on this very thing. This is the Bladensburg Veterans Memorial. It's a memorial that was put up almost 100 years ago by the American Legion and by mothers who lost their sons in World War I. And after almost 100 years, We had a liberal federal court of appeals in the Fourth Circuit say, yeah, it's been about 100 years, but we think it's unconstitutional. And if not only is the ruling wrong and bad, but if it were followed through, you'd have to go into Arlington National Cemetery and tear down the large freestanding crosses as well. And so this is going to be an opportunity now to look at the Establishment Clause and what test should be approached or applied. And I think it's a great, great opportunity because I think the vast majority, 90% of Americans believe do not tear down this Veterans Memorial because it's in a cross shape. That's outrageous. Well, that makes it a very easy vehicle for them to say, this is a good case for us to change the test, the law, to go back to what the Constitution really says, because very few people are going to criticize them because they're going to agree with the result. And so I think there's a real opportunity. This is one to be watching, the Bladensburg case that we're doing. If people haven't heard about it or want more detail, go to firstliberty.org. You can look at the Bladensburg case. You can look at the briefs. You can look at everything that's been filed. We have all that available. There's been tons of articles written because this is a big case. Even the stories of the lives of the 49 young men who were memorialized by that memorial. It's just incredible stories. But this is going to be a great opportunity for this doctrine to change.
I just love the physical proximity of the Bladensburg Cross to the Arlington National Cemetery. And really, if they're going to say that this Bladensburg Cross violates the Establishment Clause, there is no logical reason that the entire Arlington Cemetery doesn't. And it almost helps the judges on the Supreme Court get to the right decision, because they can't. None of them are going to want to sign on to a decision saying, yes, any symbol of Christianity or of faith on public land is a violation of the Establishment Clause. It's kind of a blessing. It makes it easy for them. And on that Establishment Clause idea, I keep going back to what happens in society, but to embellish the Establishment Clause to the point where you're saying any hint that the government, a public institution like public schools, are even sending a friendly signal toward religion, permitting, you're undermining in a very subtle way. You're just undermining the notion in society that religion has a vibrant place in public life. It's a message of just, keep it to yourself, keep it down, maybe talk about it in your home, but not with the Bible study. There's too many people, keep it in your church. But this kind of, rejuvenating the place of faith in America by getting rid of this Establishment Clause confusion will be really a blessing for everyone of all faiths.
Yeah, I feel like the shackles are about to start to come off the Constitution, because we actually, this is bizarre that we're even having to say this, but for the first time in our lives, we have 5 justices who actually want to follow the Constitution.
Yes.
And instead of what they want, and people wonder, why was this fight so hard over Kavanaugh? This is why, that we actually have 5 justices who don't have their own political agenda. They don't care whether the thing is left wing or right wing. They feel like their job is to simply look at the law, look at the constitutions, look at the words of the statutes, and simply apply what was done, the original meaning. And that's going to take us back to the flourishing of religious freedom that our founders wanted us to have. And I really think this Bladensburg case is the first. It's the first one. What was one of our arguments in there? It was you need to get rid of lemon, and that's. Here's an article written that you can look at pointofview.net. It's the second article. What is one of the first things they say? Need to get rid of lemon, and so we're really going to start to see the battle go on there. Some of this stuff might take a while, but we're going to see things change, and the Constitution's vibrancy is going to become alive.
I was going to say, and I only have 10 seconds to say it, but good thing I can talk fast. There really is the difference between a conservative justice and a liberal justice is not the same as in politics. It's follow the Constitution versus the make up stuff vision, portion of the court. Maybe we'll go back to that after this break.
We'll come back to it and also talk about how is it that the Fourth Circuit ended up looking like the Ninth Circuit. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Does plagiarism matter to Christians? That is a question Dr. Warren Throckmorton asked in a recent column. I had him and Mary DeMuth on the Point of View radio talk show to discuss some of the problems that have surfaced in Christian publishing. In the secular world, plagiarism is a big deal. In his article, he documents cases where people have lost their jobs or received severe sanctions both in the newsroom and in the academy. And if a professor catches a student engaged in plagiarism, we know that student faces severe consequences as well. Warren Throckmorton isn't convinced that the Christian world takes the issue seriously given the response to a number of high-profile cases of Christian authors lifting material from other books and calling it their own. Sometimes there's a legal settlement, but often the issue is greeted with a yawn with no further action taken. Mary DeMuth believes that one of the reasons for this problem is the Christian celebrity culture. Big-name authors bring in lots of revenue to Christian publishers. At the same time, there is pressure for authors to produce books quickly. Interns or associates they hire to write much of the material may not be careful about what they lift from other sources, and sometimes the authors themselves are borrowing concepts from other authors without appropriate citation. Warren Throckmorton also believes that if we started demanding that authors write their own material, ghostwriters and researchers would be out of work, and fewer books would be published by these authors each year. We might expect that the Christian world would hold to a higher standard in publishing than the secular world, but the lack of response from Christians on social media about some of these cases of plagiarism suggests that we aren't holding authors to that standard. The solution, of course, is for those of us in the Christian public to hold them accountable. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hey, once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We haven't done very good at taking your phone calls, and we will do so. But again, when we have two very intelligent lawyers around the table here, I'd just love to hear from them as well. We've talked about the Establishment Clause, and that is the idea that Congress shall not establish religion. But there's another part, the Free Exercise Clause. And Kelly Shackelford, in this particular article, John Yu says the same thing you've said, and that is essentially since the Smith case, free exercise cases have just vanished. Of course, there was the Religious Freedom Restoration Act to try to counteract some of it, but almost all the religious freedom cases have been won on free speech.
That's right.
Explain that now, if you might.
Well, what happened was, I think most people look at the Free Exercise Clause and think that's pretty powerful protection that, we're protected. Our free exercise of religion is protected against the government. Well, this decision, the Smith decision, said that if a law or a government action is generally applicable or neutral on its face, in other words, it doesn't aim at your religion or your church or your faith, then there is no violation of the free exercise of religion, which is news, I'm sure, to the founders and all the rest of us. So that would mean that, they can't pass a law saying, well, the Baptist Church can't do this, but they can pass a law that bans everybody, and even if it destroys your church, there's no religious freedom violation because it applied to everybody. So, for instance, let's say they took the no alcohol to minors law, and they decided to start going into the Catholic Church and arresting the priest. If the priest were to say, hey, wait a second, I'm protected by the Free Exercise Clause, this is the free exercise of religion, they'd say, no, I'm sorry, your free exercise isn't implicated here because this law wasn't aimed just at the church. So it's a horrible decision. It means since then, all people who practice law like us fighting for religious freedom, the only way we could win cases for free exercise is really to use the free speech clause, because free exercise, you'd lose. And so almost all the major victories have been under free speech, which is horrible. Well, again, that needs to change. And this article says we need to get rid of the Smith decision. Now, interesting thing about that is we have a case right now at First Liberty sitting at the Supreme Court. Last briefing will probably be in early next year, and probably by March we'll hear. And this is the Klein case, the Oregon bakers, Aaron and Melissa, who were fined $135,000 for not doing a gay wedding cake and had their business destroyed. It's bankrupted. Were ordered not to speak publicly their beliefs about marriage, their Christian beliefs about marriage. This case, when we sent this to the Supreme Court, we said, look, you can decide this on free speech because this is the government compelling people to say things that they don't agree with, and that's a clear violation.
Right.
But we really think you should use this case as the opportunity to overturn Smith. Now that we have 5 justices who want to actually go back to what the Constitution says, this is going to be sitting before them. So this is the example of what this article is talking about. And that would be a huge increase in vibrancy for religious freedom protection if we could actually use the free exercise clause again to protect people, because it's been rare that it's been able to be used in the last 40 years because of the way it's been treated through these decisions, which were wrong.
There's something also in this article, that was a great summary in the same article that both Kelly and Kerby have been talking about, that was trying to describe what did the founders mean then? What did they mean by these 2 very simple clauses? I mean, the First Amendment on religion is very short, 2 couple of sentences, and there's some research by Mitch McConnell and Michael McConnell, not Mitch, Michael McConnell, relating to the Bill of Rights, and he said basically, an establishment of religion had historical meaning and was manifested in, number 1, government practices of coercing individuals in the area of religion, number 2, interfering with church autonomy, number 3, proclaiming a church, and number 4, improperly financially supporting a church. He said that this research by Michael McConnell relates to what the founders actually meant by these clauses. And he said, actually, this historical test that they're advocating for will restore the clause to its rightful role, fostering religion generally, so long as the government doesn't favor any particular sect or invade a faith's internal domain. It has a very intending to support a robust practice of religion in America, not as has been minimized by Supreme Court decisions to restrain religion and to constantly litigate whether a particular practice is permitted in public or by public officials or on public grounds. It was intended to encourage the robust faith or practice of your faith, which would be a great thing for the court to acknowledge openly in a decision.
Yeah, I mean, think of both of these things we're talking about. First, the Establishment Clause, and let's take this case out of the Fourth Circuit, the Bladensburg Veterans Memorial, the cross that is going at the Supreme Court that we'll be arguing probably in March. We hadn't gotten the dates yet. If that cross comes down, what other crosses have to come down?
Of course.
Okay, not just veterans memorials.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think of that. What other references to God around the country have to come down? I mean, we're talking about like a religious cleansing. Okay, that's one type of country. The other type of country is one where there are religious images all over the country because, it's a people with a religious heritage who aren't ashamed of religion. They actually think it's a good thing. Those are 2 very different countries, okay? And think of the same thing. The implication of if the government can now destroy your business if you don't agree with their view on same-sex marriage, you think that's going to stay just in your business? You think that's not going to come to every area of your life?
Well, to the churches.
And exactly right. And so there's that versus a vibrancy, a protection, a free market of ideas and even of religious faith where people can run. You know what? If you don't like that business because their religious beliefs cause them to operate their business in a way that you don't think is good or you think is offensive, you don't have to go buy their products there. That's what America's about. We let everybody have their freedom. We let there be a variety of choices, a variety of religious beliefs, and we don't have the government come in and crush our opponents. So there are two very different Americas in religious freedom from both of these issues that we're talking about here. We've been really hampered down, and I almost feel like a wet blanket has been cast over us with religious freedom that now I think is about to be lifted, and there's going to be a flourishing and a freedom. I don't know how long it's going to take. Was it going to take 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years? I don't know, but I do think we're going to start to see things change, and we really need to be in prayer. Pray for these cases. Pray for our justices. We might get another justice. This is why the Senate's so important, being now 53-47. If there's another Supreme Court justice seat open, I mean, that's going to be important. All these lower courts, the judges we're getting on those, pray for that. Pray for, we're working on the briefs right now in Bladensburg, trying to lay out for the court, you need to get rid of these old things, which everybody knows are false. So what is your new approach going to be under the Constitution? We have to lay that out. That's never really been done before. So pray for all these things because a lot of stuff is about to happen. I think it's going to be really good, but we need to be in prayer about that.
Well, I think you should also support it as well. I mean, when you're reading this article, all of a sudden it says, and because of this case of a cross in a Maryland park, the court can once and for all dispose of Lemon. Well, that's your case. So,
yes.
I say this occasionally. I support First Liberty. I encourage all of our listeners to do so. We are talking to the individual who will actually be working with those who will actually argue this case before the Supreme Court in March. And that's just one case. You may have two others, three.
That's right.
I saw what happened at Alliance Defending Freedom when they had two cases before the Supreme Court. These guys were almost bleeding from the eyes because they had so much they had to do. And so right now you already have one case before the Supreme Court. So pray for First Liberty, but also support them. They deserve your support.
And the same research I mentioned a moment ago, Michael McConnell, who's trying to go back to what do the founders mean by these rights. What I was reading a moment ago related to the Establishment Clause, how it really just meant not the government being prevented from interfering with churches, proclaiming a state church, improperly financing a church, or coercing individuals. But the Establishment Clause also has plenty of evidence. But the Free Exercise Clause, there's also a great deal of evidence about what the founders meant by the Free Exercise Clause, and they viewed it as a manifestation of or a protection of what John Locke was talking about, natural rights. They just, the freedom of this at the time of the founding, the free exercise of religion was understood to be a natural right. This beautiful idea about just simply because you were born. You have a God-given right, a natural right. So the Free Exercise Clause was there to memorialize that, to put it in writing, to say that's what we stand for. It wasn't a concoction of the founders as much as an acknowledgement of what you have simply because you were born.
If you'd like to join our conversation, we'll open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212, if you want to talk about religion. We come back, though, one of our other articles, I think it's our third article, has to do with the migrant caravan. Wanted to at least go around the round table for a minute and get that comment. Also, some really good material from our good friends there at Tony Perkins' ministry, Family Research Council, and some research from Pew about evangelical voter myths. All that coming up right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers, defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly Shackelford, Debbie Georgatos, and one of our other articles, the third article there, Trump and Carson on the migrant caravan. Now, let me just hasten to add that I put that one there just to start a conversation about the caravan in general. The Guardian tried to make it sound like Ben Carson and Donald Trump disagree. I don't think they disagree that much, but I appreciate the fact that Ben Carson was saying, that we're not enemies here. We certainly welcome immigrants into this society, and we don't always have to be at each other's throats, and that was the point that he was making. But Debbie, let me come to you because I know on your program, and this is a good advertisement for America Can We Talk on Sunday, you have talked about this caravan, and there's just been, we're going to talk about myths about voters in just a minute, but there are all sorts of myths about this caravan that the mainstream media has perpetuated that are just simply not true.
Absolutely the case. And there are now at least 4 different caravans, and maybe more than that, and a large number of them have amassed just on the Mexico side of the U.S.-Mexico border, just south of California. And the important things to keep in mind about this, because the media has tried to depict these people as they are from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, and the media has tried to depict the caravan as just a hapless, impoverished group of people who decided to walk hundreds of miles, in fact, thousands of miles, to come to America because they are, and then it varies whether they say they are somehow persecuted, they are merely impoverished, but the effort is made to paint them as just horrible victims, and that therefore and it's a very much an effort to embarrass Donald Trump and to embarrass the Republican Party or those people who speak up for the rule of law. The simple fact is most people in the caravan the sympathetic ones in the caravan are pawns. They are pawns of the organizations such as Pueblos Sin Fronteras, which is People Without Borders, which is an international socialist organization funding this group, training, feeding, housing, clothing, advising, coaching, and manipulating this group of people. This is an international socialist organization committed on their website to the ending of international borders. They want a one world socialist government. They deplore international borders. They do not want America to have a border. It's an attempt to push against the border. And this group is not just funding, encouraging, feeding, housing, clothing these people as they've marched along the way. They're also actually on the ground with them, walking along with them, encouraging them, telling them what to say when reporters come. This is a manipulated effort to really push against America and the idea of having sovereignty and enforceable borders. So it is the Pueblos Sin Fronteras, other NGOs, the United Nations in the middle of all this, another anti-American group. And so the people who are part of the caravan, the second really big point to understand is that something in the range of 90% of these people are males, young, working age males. It is not a bunch of mothers and children. There are a few mothers and children, but about 10%. These are and what I'm saying to you comes from on-the-ground video camera reporting, people embedded with the caravan explaining who this is. So, yes, there is poverty in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. Yes, there is a need to try to help them. America does help them. Maybe we should help them more, send more money. But this caravan is an invasion. President Trump is correct to use that term. It is an effort to flood the American border, to force America to simply surrender the border, to decide we can't. And then the other... there are many factors important to understand. Another one is that the argument is these people want to come and make a request for asylum. Asylum, our country, America, has a law related to the grounds on which you can seek asylum. Every country has this. Asylum, generally speaking, internationally speaking, asylum is the idea that you are escaping persecution and you must, in the first country you enter after leaving the country where you've been persecuted, you must seek asylum in that country. Some of these people did seek asylum in Mexico. Mexico granted asylum to some of them didn't qualify. But in America, our law is very similar to other countries. You can only get asylum in America if you are persecuted in your home country for your race, religion, nationality, political opinion. And then the fifth, it is particular social group, which is one, there's a move in Congress to try to eliminate that category because it's kind of a catch-all, it doesn't mean anything. But poverty is not a basis on which we grant asylum. Being the victim of domestic violence is not a basis on which we grant asylum. You have to have standards in law, and asylum standards say what they say. So virtually everyone in this caravan is not going to meet any of the criteria in our asylum laws. So they've come all this way at the urging and pushing of the NGOs, Pueblos Sin Fronteras, United Nations, other groups like that, pushing them to our border to embarrass America, to say, essentially allow them to have the opportunity to say in the media, look at America, the richest country on earth. They have all this money, these poor people, look how bedraggled and suffering they are. Just let them in. The left-wing idea of this ultimately is once they're inside the border and they appear and request asylum, and then the asylum process is being pursued. We have the law that prevents America from holding the children for any longer than whatever the number of days it is. And so we end up telling people seeking asylum, okay, well, we got your application. You come back now for your court date. And we let them wander free. And of course, they never come back again.
Never come back.
So it is a very tough situation, but it does require backbone and clarity by the people in charge of responding to this to not surrender the border to the pressure and not to agree simply because these anti-American socialists have managed to assemble such a large crowd to say, okay, well, since they're here and since it seems like we're embarrassed by this, we're just going to let them come in, because you'll eventually end up with a large group of people in America that don't have any legal status here. And they'll eventually, if there were to be a Democrat majority in the House and Senate and have the White House, they would all be instantly citizens with the right to vote, which is the agenda of many in the American left.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the sad thing is that this really, the part of the reason for this is because the Congress won't do its job.
Mm-hmm.
Time
to fix this.
Congress should, fix our immigration laws, make this clear, lay everything out, but they don't want to, and so they don't care about what happens to these people. They don't care about really. They care about one thing. They want voters, and that's all about. I heard a proposal, and I thought he said, if you want to expose what's really going on here, then say, you know what, we're going to give amnesty to everybody who's come here. We're going to give amnesty to everybody who's coming in right now, but on one condition: they can't vote for 25 years. So they'd be against it. Because this is about getting voters. And that's what's so sad is it's not about what's best for the country. It's not about the proper way to do this system. It's because Congress won't do its job because they have their own political goals that they're trying to accomplish. And that's sad. And look, and that's a little bit on both sides. The Democrats want the voters, and the Republican, the business side, wants cheap labor, and so that's what you've got pushing this, and why, unless the American people demand this, which they've been sort of getting towards, I just don't think we're ever going to get the solution.
There was also a study done by USC, University of Southern California, that was reported in the Washington Times today, and they were essentially saying that, contrary to what the media tries to argue, that this is a caravan full of people who are persecuted in their country and subject to violence or persecution based on one of those categories I just read, they're really mostly just people coming to America who may be looking for jobs. They don't have jobs or sufficient jobs in the country they're from, can't be paid enough. But they're also coming for the financial well-being of America, essentially to join our welfare ranks, to become eligible for all sorts of government-funded benefits, which may confirm the idea that they're impoverished and that the country they're coming from is impoverished. But America literally cannot take in every impoverished person in the world, of whatever it is, 7.5 billion in the world now, and over 2 billion are in some stage of impoverishment. We can't take them all in America. So the idea of saying this, so what the USC study was saying was essentially these people are not coming here because they are part of a persecuted group. There's not guns being fired at them. There's not bullets. These are people looking for overwhelmingly jobs and welfare. And they may need it, but that doesn't mean the right answer of America is to simply surrender.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I wanted to get your comments. Since we've just finished an election, we will certainly pretty soon be hearing about the next one. Hard to believe, but that's really the case. One of the articles we've posted here comes from Family Research Council, and actually they're quoting from Alan Cooperman. He's the director of religion research for the Pew Research. And really, it helps debunk 4 evangelical voter myths. The myths are, real quickly, that evangelicals are turning liberal or turning against Trump. Not true. That younger evangelicals, a group that we talk about sometimes on Wednesday, the Millennial Roundtable, are more liberal and are turning Democratic. Not necessarily. Real evangelicals are not supportive of Trump. And then number 4, white evangelicals are abandoning the evangelical label. So we want to come back and talk about that briefly. And also we've posted some articles about, and this is just a sad series of articles that have come out in the Washington Post and New York Times, but also David French has written about it and others. The whole issue of life expectancy dropping because of suicide and opioid epidemics. A lot of very important issues we'll talk about. We'll do that right after this.
The midterms brought an interesting lesson in racial politics. Columnist and black conservative activist Star Parker says voting data reveals what she describes as a fateful anomaly in racial voting in the governor's race between Democrat Andrew Gillum and Republican Ron DeSantis, now Florida's governor-elect. Mr. Gillum is the former mayor of Tallahassee and was running to become the first black governor of Florida. Star Parker points out that the black enthusiasm we might have expected for him didn't exactly pan out. Racial politics, she writes, played a high-profile and nasty role in the Gillum-DeSantis contest. Gillum lobbed strong and unfair allegations of racism against DeSantis. Yet black young adults posted a significant increase in votes for Republicans over Democrats in this election. It's actually African-American women who made the difference for Ron DeSantis. William Maddox writes in the Wall Street Journal that 100,000 of the 650,000 black women who voted in Florida unexpectedly chose him over the black Democratic candidate Andrew Gillum. This is 18% of black women supporting the governor-elect. Only 9% of this group voted for Republican Senator-elect Rick Scott. What was the issue that prompted these women's support for a Republican? School choice. Mr. Maddox is director of the Marshall Center for Educational Options at the James Madison Institute. He points out that 4 years ago, Florida's Governor Scott narrowly won re-election thanks to a spike in support from school choice moms. Ron DeSantis campaigned on parental choice in education. He voiced his staunch support for retaining and even expanding Florida's tax credit-funded scholarship program that enables more than 100,000 low-income students to attend private school. Andrew Gillum opposes school choice. The lesson is, let's boldly support the conservative policies blacks care about. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just again mention a couple of things. If you want any information about Kelly Shackelford, just click on the picture of him, and that will take you to First Liberty. Let me again talk about some of those religious liberty resource kits. Those are available. Debbie Georgatos, of course, she always says that this program sometimes is show prep for Sunday. And you got Jerome Corsi on now, obviously, if he cancels, but you've got some pretty high-profile people on this Sunday, don't you?
I sure do. This this for all of our listeners. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you can watch my show on Facebook Live at Sunday evening, 6 to 8 p.m. Central Time at the America Can We Talk Facebook page, or it's on some Salem stations, or you can go to my website, americacanwetalk.org, and click on Listen Live. You can listen. So, this Sunday, I have on Hans von Spakovsky from Heritage Foundation. Yeah, he's always great. Going to be talking about the acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker and why all the allegations of him not being able to participate in the Mueller thing are wrong. And then I also have Jerome Corsi, who is in crosshairs of the Mueller team, because they got him to say after they already had all of his emails, all of his social media, all of his phone records, asked him a question: did you ever forward an email related to anyway, and he said no. And who would remember an email from 2 years ago? But it turns out he gave an incorrect answer, and they let him change his answer and say, okay, yes, I did forward an email related to this one topic. But the point is, the FBI is now saying, okay, we can prosecute you for the felony of lying to the FBI. And they want him to sign something saying he lied. And he's saying this is a Mueller trap and that he won't sign.
Yeah. So again, you'll have a chance to hear all of that. But let me, around the round table, real quickly mention one of our articles. I think it's the fourth article here, debunks evangelical voter myths. Kelly, you've looked at these for years, and this individual, Aller Cooperman, was head of the religious research division at Pew. And I just think it illustrates again that the mainstream media is telling us that evangelicals are turning against Trump and evangelicals aren't supportive. You were invited to the White House with a lot of other evangelicals, and at least that group of individuals seemed like they were very supportive of the president.
I think all the data shows very clearly that evangelicals have been very supportive because of the policies. I mean, it's not, the number one issue to evangelicals in the election was what? The next Supreme Court justice. Why? Because it affects all of the issues that are at the top of their list. Religious freedom, the sanctity of life, all of these things. So I think there's a lot of myths that aren't true. And again, it's odd, but this president has reached out more, done more, has more people in his cabinet. I mean, we've never had a Bible study where numerous cabinet-level people are having a Bible study every week in the White House.
That?
I mean, there's a lot of things going on that have never gone on before. The type of judges we're getting on the court, et cetera. So that's why it's the issues that they care about and what he's doing. There's a lot of false information in there.
I would think so.
Yeah. I think there's been a lot of effort. The media, they find certain aspects of the president's personal life or his choice of words in Twitter or things that happen in his personal life anciently or currently. The media thinks they can turn Americans against him by just harping on those things and repeating them, keeping the headlines. But I think that people are smarter than that. They see the policies he's doing, the impact of his executive orders, the impact of his protection of religion, his being open about it, and they've just decided, okay, he's not a perfect guy on every single measure there could be, but he's doing the right things for America, and the evangelicals see that, and I think the media just can hardly believe their relentless attacks aren't having the effect they hoped.
Yeah, well, I think all that's baked in already. I mean, it's not. I don't think anybody was surprised at the character or the kind of Twitters or the way he treats people. Which again, evangelicals say you shouldn't treat people that way. But they were already aware of that when they voted for him the first time. Okay, so I don't know why the media thinks that by continuing to sort of jump on this same bandwagon, they're going to get some different result. The reality is they're looking at. For instance, this is bizarre to say, the most pro-life president in the history of the country.
Would never have predicted that 5 years ago.
The most pro-religious liberty president in the history of the country.
Hard to believe.
And I can't tell you it's because he believes in those things. I mean, I think he does. But even if it's just because he's transactional and he's the president and he knows these are really important to the constituency that got him elected, the point is, he's delivering the goods, He's putting Kavanaugh and Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. He's filling the courts below with these conservative jurists who want to follow the Constitution. He's passing executive orders on religious freedom. The list is so long. Jerusalem, right? In Israel. There's things that nobody's been willing to do. He's done all of them. And so that's why it's not it's not that they like his the way he treats everybody, or they in fact, I would say most evangelicals probably completely disagree with that. And if they were with him, they'd say, you shouldn't say that, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't. And but they're looking at the things that really do matter 30 years down the road, matters to somebody's life and death, matters to their ability to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Those things are more important. And it's you've got to pick in politics between, very, two sinful,
imperfect
choices, and everybody's like, how dare you vote for Trump? I'm like, so Hillary was like a moral compass for us? I mean, I think most people looked at that and said, it's kind of a wash. So let's look at what the policies are going to be and how those are going to impact us. So I think that's why you had such a high percentage of vote, 81% of evangelicals for Trump. And I think what this study is showing is it's not changing because he's actually doing what he said he was going to do. And so I think that's going to continue.
Well, I thought I might just mention that, we talk about Jerusalem, and I saw this interview where they were interviewing all these people at the Trump rallies, and they kept mentioning Jerusalem. Well, it wasn't exactly like people voted for him because they would move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, but it was the fact he kept his word. Well, there's another one we mentioned just the other day. In 1990, every cabinet was supposed to be audited, but they never audited the Pentagon. So George Herbert Walker Bush did not do that. Bill Clinton did not do that. George W. Bush did not do that. And Barack Obama did not do that. But Donald Trump, for the first time in more than 20, almost 30 years, had an audit of the Pentagon. By the way, the Pentagon failed. But nevertheless, the point is, there are things that no president have done that this president did.
Well, the regulations, right? Every regulation added 22, is it, I think, have been deleted. I mean, and you talk about why the economy and the GDP and everything is going through the roof. I think that's a major reason.
Of course.
The tax cut helps.
Yes.
But I think, again, lowest unemployment in the African-American community ever, Hispanic community, women, just all these things. When you look at it, if they could just say, we're not going to tell you who the president is, but here's what's going on. I think it would be a landslide, right, in favor of these different things with regard to the economy, with regard to the courts, but it's just his likability issue. He's kind of proven me wrong on a lot. I used to think it's all about the likability of the president, and I got to a point where people are like, I just don't care about that anymore. I just want to know, are they going to finally do something about our government, which is not doing anything, and they're sitting there just sucking in all of our money? And people responded.
They did. And I'll just say, I think that I agree, Kelly, that you just can't really figure out what, on a personal level, President Trump really believes with respect to faith. But in the broader, my sense of why he's so popular and well-liked still among evangelicals is he exudes a love of America. He knows religious freedom, Americans love religious freedom. He knows it matters. He knows we want a robust economy. We want jobs. He loves America. He wants it to be vibrant, the economy to be strong, people to be free. So he that's kind of his compass. He just wants to keep this country strong. Even his foreign policy is there to protect America. So people are like, okay, I don't understand exactly his faith or his political thinking exactly, but he loves America. He's doing right by America.
Well, good way to end that. And again, Kelly and Debbie, I appreciate you being part of this. Again, we have links to both their websites, and I hope you'll go and find that material. We have quite a bit to talk about next week and some really great guests on the show, so I hope you'll join us then. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. See you back on Monday.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.